Delight Your Marriage, Episode 2.
Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Belah Rose.
Hello and welcome. I'm Belah Rose, and I'm just so excited that you're here today. And this is the very first interview of the Delight Your Marriage podcast. So thank you for joining. You are in for a treat. I have got Jay Parker here from Hot, Holy, and Humorous, the website that gives you really funny anecdotes and great insights about sexual intimacy and marriage. So Jay is very sweet. She is a kind-hearted woman who I very much admire. So just listen and learn from her story. She came from a very broken place in marriage, and she made some really hard choices and changes, and now it's much different and has become a really beautiful example of love and intimacy in marriage. So without further ado, here's Jay. Welcome again to Delight Your Marriage listeners. I am so excited to be here with Jay Parker from Hot, Holy, and Humorous. And she is a wonderful blogger and writer, and she's got a couple books that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And I'm just so excited to have you, Jay. So would you go ahead and say hi to our listeners, introduce yourself, your marriage, and a little bit about your day-to-day life, if you would?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, my name is Jay Parker, and I've been married umpteen years is what I say, because it just seems like it's been a long time. I can't really imagine life without my husband. But I started the blog anonymously, so I don't give a whole lot of details about myself at this point. But we'll talk about my marriage and me. My day-to-day life includes that I write teen fiction is the other thing that I do. And then I manage my household, I raise my kids, and I primarily blog and write about Christian sex and marriage. So, and if you want to know something about me, I guess the things that I say is that with my husband, personality-wise, I am really talkative. I'm married to a guy I think he thinks that there's a quota on the number of words that you're supposed to speak a day, and he's got to keep it really down low. So he's a man of few words, and I'm the one who's really expressive. In fact, on my blog, I often refer to him as Spock, because I married the guy who's very logical, very even-keeled. But, we complement each other very well, and we do share our faith, our values. We definitely share a sense of humor, and we have wonderful intimacy.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. And I love to hear a little bit about what your personalities are like, because I think that really helps listeners to connect with, I'm a little bit more like Jay, or I'm a little bit more like her husband, and how that plays out. So this podcast is really about inspiring and empowering wives in living wholehearted intimacy in every aspect. And so I'd be interested if you could share a scripture or a quote that has meant a lot to you over the years.
Oh, yeah, I definitely have my favorites that don't we all just have these favorites that we go back to over and over. I think when it comes to, though, my personal testimony in my marriage, there's a passage that I always keep coming back to, and it's 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11. And I won't read the whole thing, but it starts out with neither the sexually immoral, and then it gives a list of a bunch of other bad things you could be doing. But it says, neither the sexually immoral, and then the list, will inherit the kingdom of God. And that is what some of you were. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. So my story is that I started off marriage with a promiscuous past, and I had a lot of bad messages running through my head about who I was and what I was worth and what intimacy would look like. But I did have a loving husband, and I came in wanting this fresh start. But still, these things just kind of kept going on in my head that I struggled with. And I think it's when I really began to piece through the Scripture and believe it, that the past was the past, and God wanted me to have this fresh start. He wanted me to get right here, right now in this marriage and build what He intended us to have. That I began to just lean into His grace and look for what he wanted us to be. And then we just developed deeper and deeper intimacy. And when I just owned that feeling that that's what I was, but now I was washed, I was sanctified, I was justified, it just gave me that fresh start that I needed.
I just love that, Jay. And I just so appreciate that for our listeners because it's so true. God is the God of second chances. And I just so appreciate that. And I really would love to hear more about your marriage story, specifically about a difficult time, so that we can really understand what it was you were going through and how you overcame that struggle.
Well, I wouldn't say we had a difficult time so much as we had difficult years. I mean, it was years. And we had a horrible marriage several years in. We had a horrible marriage. And I'm not trying to be mean about it. I am being real, and my husband would agree that it was horrible. We've talked about this. And there were several times that I wasn't sure we were going to make it. We had so many problems, and we just seemed to swing from emotionally distant to outright hostility. And it was bad. And I guess I've gotten across that idea, isn't it? It was bad. I've really made it sound awful.
Yeah,
but I guess the thing is that it was such heartache. I mean, I can think back and I can almost feel the clench in my chest remembering that time because it felt so hopeless. And we didn't have some of the things that other people I know do deal with. We didn't have an issue with adultery. There wasn't an addiction. There wasn't this. It was just problems between us. But they were still very intense, very real, very hurtful. And we didn't know how to climb out of that. I look back now and I see that several things were happening. I think I was struggling with some depression at the time. I know that we had some work and finance issues. We had different ways of dealing with things. We came from very different families of origin in how to handle problems. We had very different outlooks. And we really were not giving each other grace at the time. So everything that seemed wrong got sort of blamed on the other person. And it just escalated and escalated. Okay, so now that I've created this horrible vision of what it was like, the thing is that my story is kind of weird in that during all this time, we still experienced some amazing sexual intimacy. And it's like those moments would be breaks in our, routine programming. And those moments gave me glimpses that my guy still desired me. He wanted to be happy. He could be very selfless and caretaking there. And I just longed for him as well. And those times of closeness made me think, well, this is what I want for our whole relationship. And I honestly think that the sex life that we built together kept us from pulling apart while we were struggling with other things. And now I know we could not have lived that way for long. And so I do not think that good sex is enough to maintain a marriage, by no means. But that was a place that we sort of started from. That was something that kind of helped glue us together so that we could start working on other things. We did work on those other things. We did tackle those other things. We became intentional. We improved our marriage vastly. When we started giving grace, when we started doing things that we should have been doing all along, when we did more maintenance on us, and
even go into
our sexual intimacy got even better. like what we actually did to make it better.
Yeah, some of those, you were saying some of the things that you hadn't been doing and some of the things that you started to do. Could you give a little bit of insight into what those habits were, even on a day-to-day, what those looked like?
Some of those things were things like spending time with each other that wasn't about other things. I think I'm a big believer in that, at date night or whatever you want to call it, that alone time. And I don't know that it necessarily needs to be just the two of you. It could be family, it could be whatever, but just times that it's just about enjoying each other. We have so much of those in courtship. And then we get married, and I know that when everything was going on, it just seemed like our interactions were about the things that were not going well. And so we were trying to solve problems, but then we were always talking about the problems. And we didn't have times that we really just connected. So I think when we started going back and spending time and remembering, I really like this person. This person makes me laugh. I like holding his hand. Just those simple things. Or even playing a board game with our children. Anything that was focused on remembering that part of us. But I think that really helped, because then it made us, we see each other in a much more positive light in other ways. Also, the other thing that I really did is I started focusing on being a happier person myself. And I just realized that I was not happy and I was not fun to be around, and I needed to focus on me. I think sometimes we get so caught up in thinking we need to get the relationship right, and if we get the relationship right, then we will be happy. But I've come to believe it's really hard to have a happy marriage when one of you is very unhappy. So I think that the focus I came to was I needed to get myself right with God. I needed to become a joyful person. I needed to be a more generous person. I just needed to be the kind of person that my husband would want to be around, that I would even want to be around. And when you start out with that, and when you bring your best self into the relationship, then there's a much greater chance that the relationship itself is going to flourish and become good. So I really turned a lot of the focus on me and becoming the person I needed to be.
Wow. And then when you saw it your marriage go from, negative 100 to positive 100, what was the process in terms of time? How did this revelation kind of come about?
We did do counseling. We actually did. We tried, I want to say that we went to 3 different counselors, but I am not sure. It's at least 2. And I would love to say that was the breakthrough, because I do encourage people to get Christian counseling, and I do believe that there is some really good Christian counseling, and I have had some. It doesn't so happen to be that the marriage counseling was, in our case, the thing that really did it. I think that it made us realize how committed we were to doing this. But I think some of the breakthroughs came in other ways, in us individually doing some things that we needed to do. We did read some marriage books. We read some personality books and things like that. I think, for instance, The 5 Love Languages is a great book for any couple to read, because you may think that you are showing love and you're not, in the way that the other person understands. For instance, my husband's number 1 is acts of service, and I grew up believing that if I did things for my husband, then that's this stereotypical Edith Bunker, and I didn't want that. And so I didn't want to do stuff for him. He can just do it himself. Well, when I suddenly realized, oh, wait a minute, this shows love to him. Suddenly it just those kinds of things, it cast that in a different light for me. So there were some books and things that I went through that definitely helped. I think that probably what helped the most for me is really getting deeper into the Word. The process, I think, for us was starting to create different habits with each other and spending that time together and seeing, look, these are biblical principles that we are not living out. And we can sit in a marriage counselor's office all day long and talk about our problems, but if we go home and we are not showing any fruit of the Spirit with each other, it's not going to matter. So I think that there was sort of this, and I would like to say it was this light switch too, and you talked about the process. I think it took like a year or 2 for this to really unfold and us to really feel like we are out of the pit. And so I think that's the other thing, is I think some people give up too soon. Yeah. They feel like, well, I've tried for 3 months to make this work. Well, how long do you spend to getting your education to get a job? How long would you spend if you wanted to run a marathon? How long would you spend raising your children? It's a long-term project that you took on when you said, I do. And if things get really bad, it can take a while to get all the way back out.
Yeah.
But I do it all again in a heartbeat. Knowing
Why?
where I am now.
Exactly.
No, well, I mean, I don't want to do it all again. But I'm saying, if I knew that the only way for me to get to the marriage I have now was back through all of that, I would do it. Because I feel like I have built something beautiful. I have done the right and good thing for my kids. I know I'm going to grow old with this man, and I'm excited about that. Well, not the growing old, but the rest of my life part. And I've honored God and His design for this. So I don't have any regrets about staying in, sticking it out, working hard, making it better.
I love that you touched on you would do it again. And there are many wives, I'm sure, that are listening that are in a place of real hardship in their marriage. And I just wonder, in those really difficult moments, maybe after an argument, maybe, in the midst of some real stressors, what caused you to stick it out? What was it that made you not throw in the towel in the midst of those moments?
Honestly, there's a portion of it that is just probably my personality of being very stubborn. And I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to lose. And so there was kind of a personality part of me that was like, by golly, I am not just giving up. There was some of that. There was certainly my deep belief that God intended this to be a lifetime commitment. I also, I'm a child of divorce myself. And so I knew that was difficult for children, and I didn't want to do that to my children. And also, even in the worst times, I could remember how much I loved my husband. I mean, I knew what kind of man he was. And I have said this, that we weren't struggling. We did not have what I call the big three: abuse, addiction, and adultery. And I think if those are what you're dealing with, that's a category we really need to get help, because those are extremely intense situations, and we did not have those. So I try to be very clear about that, because I also never want to say to a person who's in a very abusive marriage, oh yeah, just stick it out and you'll be happy 5 years from now. Well, that's a different thing. But I have a very ethical husband, and so I knew that he wanted that too. And so I still believed at all times that I loved him, and if we could just somehow get out of this, we could be okay. So I just had hope.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear where your marriage is now, and even a story to illustrate what, coming out of years of struggle, what is possible in the end.
I guess what I love is at this point, we are so excited to go on date nights with each other when we get that opportunity. This is a person with whom I can talk about anything. He's such a supporter for me. When I finished this deadline I had yesterday on a big project that I've been working on, he high-fived me, which is a small thing in the privacy of your home. He's just been there for me, and he understood. He did things like, okay, we're having dinner from Taco Bell tonight because you can't cook. You've got to make this deadline. He hugged me when things go well. I think it's just that companionship, that deep intimacy of someone else who really knows you better than anyone else and still loves you and thinks you're beautiful. They've seen your best, they've seen your worst, and they're there for the long haul. My blog post that recently ran about laughter, and I think I titled it, "Does He Make You Laugh?" And I think that is one of the best parts of our relationship, is we truly make each other laugh. And I don't remember those years when things were going badly as being years of great joy and laughter. But we have that now, definitely. There's a lot of just smiling and laughter that goes on in our house now.
And I just want to encourage any listener who's out there that is struggling in the midst of a really difficult season. look what's possible on the other side, to stick it out, to go with God, to dive into the word, to decide to have date nights and to push through those difficult seasons. And it could be a long season, it could be a long time, but the potential for someone really deeply knowing you in every way and being that friend, that companion to do life with is so worth it. And I want to also add, Jay, that I'm also a child of divorce, and even as an adult, when my parents divorced, it's just never the same in terms of our family. It's just someone's missing or someone has some drama issue that kind of surrounds that. And
Yes.
It's why God did purpose marriage for a lifetime, because he desires family to be that solid community, that friendship that lasts a lifetime.
I do think we pull out the verse oftentimes, God hates divorce, and I think that's true. But I think we need to understand the reason God hates divorce is because he sees what it does to his people. Anyone who's been through a divorce, it wasn't an easy process for them. So I know that it's very hard on families. And I also wanted to make sure, because I mentioned the abuse, addiction, and adultery, I want to make sure I'm clear that I do believe that there is reconciliation and healing for many, many of those marriages. So I don't want to cast any doubt that those can become wonderful. I just think that they need additional care.
Yeah.
So I don't ever want to make light of that either.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, it's funny. I'll also mention my father was addicted to alcohol for most of my life. And just about, just within the last year, he has become totally sober. And a 45-year addiction gone, so many, many, many years of praying. But again, the hope that someone can change, certainly there's a lot of work that has to be done, but God can do really amazing things in marriages and in addictions and some other of these big challenges. So I certainly agree with that. And I'm interested, Jay, in telling our listeners, what do you think maybe the chief 3 things you feel has been central to your marital success?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start with something I mentioned, which was living out God's commands. I think there were years that I prayed for things to get better. Of course, many of those prayers were things like, "Dear God, please change my husband in X way." So, which is how a lot of us pray. But I would pray about things, or I would even, I might even pray about me. I would, read marriage books and marriage materials, but often is a way to say, see, this is what we're supposed to be doing, and things like that. And I think that I took the wrong tactic. And when I started, I think the success has been saying, you know what, a marriage lived out according to biblical principles is very likely to be successful. And I think one of the things that hit me when I started studying, too, is that marriages were formed in all kinds of different ways in the Bible. We live in a world where, a society where we fall in love, we choose our own mates, we get married, and so forth. Well, that was not always the case in the Bible. There were people who were married for family reasons or, arranged marriages. But God didn't expect those necessarily to be unhappy marriages. He said, look, you can still have a good marriage if you will do these things. And I think if we start looking at this, and if we start practicing kindness and gentleness and self-control and patience and love, it's amazing what can develop. And when I started saying, I am going to do these things, I'm going to be a godly person in my marriage, I think that really, shot our success up. Because also your spouse is going to feel that. They're going to feel better taken care of, better loved, and they're likely to respond in a more positive way. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's just believing God that if you live like that, it's going to make a real difference in your relationships. Can we go for number 2?
Yeah. So I would sum the first one is living out the fruits of the Spirit. Is that probably the way you would say it as well?
Yes, that would be it. I kind of probably looked into the fruits of the Spirit and the love chapter of 1 Corinthians 13 were two things that I would run through my brain as I was trying to figure out how to behave.
Yeah. I mean, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, one piece of the love chapter that always gets me is keeping no records of wrongs.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah, like all those, comments or rolling of eyes or didn't share this or didn't serve me in that way or insulted me this way or was selfish in that way. It's just, it says love keeps no records of wrongs.
Well, then you're going to love number 2 on my list.
Oh, okay.
Because the second thing I think is giving each other the benefit of the doubt, which you could also say is giving each other grace. But I think the other thing is I used to think that stuff that my husband would do was like personal. Like I'd walk through the bedroom and he would have 10 pairs of shoes out all over the room, and I would think, oh, he knows I hate this, and he just put them here anyway, and blah, 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 blah. And they can go there in our heads so much. Or they say something, and we think, well, what do you mean by that? We automatically assume the worst. Or even those women I hear from, and I've been there too, where your husband says, wow, you look beautiful, and you say, you're just saying that. And we blow them off, and we think, well, they're just flattering me to get sex or whatever.
Right.
I think that's where switching it around was such a big deal and has really been part of the success story. Is it's not personal that my husband's leaving shoes out. He did that before he met me. He would do that if I went away. It drove his mother crazy too. It's some of these things. It's not personal, and sometimes if somebody says something and you think, I can't believe my husband said that. Well, maybe it came out in a way they didn't realize either. And so I started saying some things to him like, wait a minute. Did you mean to say that? What I heard was blah, 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 blah. And we're just thinking through what he was trying to say. And just those moments of giving each other grace, clarifying with each other, believing the compliments. It's just, I think that is a switch that people can make in their marriages that really makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's huge too.
I guess number 3 is probably along the lines of the keep no record of wrongs, because the other thing I think is I've just let some things go. Some things that I used to think were so important to happen just this way, I've just let go. I've just started reprioritizing and saying, you know what, if I really wanted us to do X, Y, and Z, but if we only do X, can I let Y and Z go? And it turns out there's really a lot of things that we get in our head that we think must happen in our households or in our relationships. Maybe you think that Valentine's Day has to be celebrated this particular way. Well, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you could hang on to the most important thing to you and let some other things go. And I don't know what that would be. And I think sometimes it's stuff about finances or parenting or household, but or it could just be the way y'all interact.
Yeah.
But I've made the decision inside myself that there are just some things that it's okay if they don't happen the way I thought that they would. Life doesn't happen the way we think it's going to. So why do we still expect our marriages to be, some imaginary thing we've created in our heads?
Yes. And I love that, because it almost seems like you're alluding to, we can't control life, but we think we can control our marriage or our husband. And that should not be our posture on marriage. I love also that you said reprioritize. What really is most important here? Is it most important that, you win the argument, or that your husband feels heard and understood? What really matters in the situation? Yeah, I think that's golden.
And I think all the ones I mentioned, now think about it, were things that I did. There were decisions that I made, to live out these commandments, to give him grace, to let these things go. And there were things I didn't sit around waiting on my spouse to fix it all. And he certainly changed over the years. He's done his own changing, his own growing. But I really believe God's not going to be very impressed with us if we get to heaven and we say, well, it's all my mate's fault. And so I think we've got to take hold of this and do everything that we can. And I think some people will be surprised by the response they might get back when they start doing what they can do to be a success in their marriage.
Jay, I love that, and I'm completely on board with you that we can each be proactive and we can be the person that may even change the tide of how our marriage looks and feels if we just are willing to be humble and go the extra mile. So I'm going to stop the episode here because we ran out of time, but the next episode has got the rest of Jay's really great interview, and you don't want to miss it because she specifically talks about the 3 reasons women come to her site and their biggest issues, and she kind of gives them some really great advice, so I don't want you to miss that. In the meantime, go to delightyourmarriage.com for all the show notes, the links, and everything that we talked about on this episode. And then lastly, delightyourhusband.com is where my course is, specifically helping women get past their fears in intimacy and into confidence and freedom in the bedroom. So definitely check that out. Thank you so much for listening and taking time out of your day to be here with me and with Jay and really investing in your marriage. I think it's going to make a big difference for you and your husband. So I want you to know that I'm praying for you and your marriage, and I love you and asking God to bless you this week. Bye.
Thanks for being with us. If you loved, liked, or just found this episode interesting, go to delightyourmarriage.com and continue the conversation in the comments. Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.